Good evening. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions. The majority in cases from Texas and Georgia said that the decision to end a pregnancy during the first 3 months belongs to the woman and her doctor, not the government.
This year marks the 30th anniversary of the historic Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision. It's been 30 years since abortion became legalized in this country, 3 decades since women were given the legal right to choose. Roe v. Wade meant an end to a nightmarish time where few, if any, choices were available for women who were faced with an unwanted pregnancy. In the years preceding the Roe v. Wade decision, thousands of women died each year from illegal abortions. It was a time when physicians helplessly witnessed the horrible tragedy of illegal abortions firsthand. It was a time when many doctors chose to take their own personal course of action, a course of action that helped change the system. These doctors are but a few of those physicians whose actions helped to save thousands of women's lives during the pre-Roe era.
It's important that the history be known, and I think it's important that the medical profession know what it was like. It's so easy to forget.
A lot of people talk about that they had a single decisive event that formulated their opinions and commitment. With me, it was more of a one thing after another that just kept reinforcing my decisions and deepening my commitment until I finally decided, this is what we have to do.
When I graduated medical school, I was not particularly sympathetic to patients having an abortion. I felt that they should have done better.
Women who were pregnant with an unintended pregnancy, none of the options that were open were good.
We saw women coming in with incomplete abortions that had been obviously induced.
Women took chances with their life every day. That every time they went for an illegal abortion, they were, as far as they knew, taking a chance. They just didn't know how big a chance.
I remember so distinctly one woman came in twice in my internship, and the second time she came in because she had used a rubber catheter to push up inside the cervix. And ingeniously, she had taken a Coke bottle, broken it off, fired the end of it so she made her own speculum. And she would put the neck into the vagina and then get it against the cervix, and then somehow or other manage to get this rubber tubing up inside.
Women would insert the potassium permanganate tablets in their vagina, and it was a very caustic and corrosive material, and the women would bleed like crazy because it would just eat big holes in the vagina. And they somehow thought that bleeding was equivalent to having an abortion. Well, of course it wasn't. Women would develop high fevers, septicemia, blood poisoning, pelvic abscesses, infertility, either because they had to have their uterus removed or because their tubes were inflamed and infected from the abortion. And of course, those were the lucky ones, because many of those women died.
I think the image that I retain was that of a 31-year-old Mexican-American woman who died of endotoxic shock with her husband and 4 or 5 children around. And that scene is in my mind, and has been in my mind, coming back all the time. Oh, I see the bed, I see the kids crying, and I see the husband cry.
When I was a resident, if a person came in with what looked like an illegal abortion, we not only had to fight to save her life, We had to call the police, who would come in and interview this patient, who had already been through the doors of hell. And the police would have to interview her, because to be a patient of an abortionist was a crime in itself.
We were reduced to become the tormentor of the patient, to make her confess. We had to go in and try to scare her so severely that she would admit that she had instrumented herself. This was the travesty. We're physicians, we're doctors. To save her life, we had to scare her to death almost.
It just didn't make sense that we would be withholding a safe legal procedure that could have eliminated all of this heartache and trauma and threat to their lives.
Not surprisingly, a woman's race and economic situation determined the options she had when faced with an unwanted pregnancy.
You had a child as a young black girl. You weren't going anywhere hardly if you were a young black girl in the ghetto anyway. So you had a child, you were finished, completely finished.
Life was pretty hard. If a woman elected to have a baby, and she was a low-income woman, and it was decided that she'd had too many children, or if she got pregnant and went to a doctor and asked for an abortion, her option was the same. I'll give you an abortion, but you have to have a hysterectomy. The same thing was done with a woman who had had a baby, and they determined that she'd had enough children. She would be given what was called a Mississippi appendectomy, and that was an hysterectomy that was done, or either her tubes were tied while she was under anesthesia.
Because there was very little contraception, of course, poor women had no outlet for really protection. The only protection, of course, was condoms. And so they got pregnant very often. And I would notice that there were periods of time in which my mother and my aunts would get sick, and they would be whispering between them. And I would hear the word abortion, and I would see how sick they were during these periods of time.
There would be a certain woman who you could go and pay a visit to and give some money to, and they could give you something to take. They were like big black pills that were supposed to make you have a period.
You'd go to an abortionist, and they would charge you anywhere from $60, $80, $100, $120 in that range. Not even $200, because people didn't have a lot of money to have an abortion.
Many women talk about being up on kitchen tables having abortions, and you didn't know who the person was who was doing it. They didn't know what they were doing either, and didn't really care.
Physicians who were moved and outraged by what they saw took different courses of action. Some physicians, like Dr. Curtis Boyd, made the decision to provide abortions illegally. It was a choice that put these doctors, as well as their families, at great risk. If caught, it meant losing their medical licenses or going to prison.
The 60s for me were a political time. I know people think of them in different ways, but it was a social action, and I was very much interested in that idealistic changing of the world, making this a better society, a better world, a fairer place. There was actually a feeling that we were in a revolution. Here was something that was really important, I'd come to believe. It was important not only to human freedom, but to women's liberation. It was essential. Here's a place where I could make a difference.
Dr. Eugene Glick performed illegal abortions to a select group of patients, family, and friends. With the help of other doctors, he also found ways of skirting the system to provide abortions at the hospital where he worked.
I started looking for ways to circumvent the law. So the extent was the fact that we began to enter into almost a collusion of the doctors in our hospital.
Although passionately believing in a woman's right to choose, Dr. Millie Hansen elected to work entirely within the hospital system, making it possible for some women to obtain safe and legal abortions.
There were many times when I was tempted to step over the legal line. At that time, I was divorced and supporting 4 children. There's no way I could lose my license, and still no way I could go to prison, for example.
Dr. Hansen, as well as many other pro-choice physicians across the country, served on her hospital's abortion committee. Abortion committees reviewed formal requests for abortions and decided whether to approve them. Not all committees adhered to the same standards for abortion approval. In some states, the threat of suicide was considered a danger to the woman's life and would warrant an approval. In others, it would not.
The sterilization and abortion committees were a way to get around the law prior to Roe versus Wade. We had a system all worked out. We had a system put into motion so that we could almost assure the patient that the process would go forward.
So people were looking for a way to give a woman a legal abortion. So she came in and she had diabetes, or she had high blood pressure, or she had a psychiatric history, said that she was going to kill herself, or she was starting to have emotional breakdowns. We would get in the committee and we would decide who we would give a legal abortion.
I would coach her that she must convince the psychiatrist that she was indeed suicidal. How when she walked across the bridge, she would think, I'm just going to crawl over the top and jump over.
You needed all of the authorities saying that this could be done legally so that the criminal system would not impinge on this woman.
Is that unethical to coach a person? Is that lying? Maybe a little bit of both, but when you're between a rock and a hard place, you do what you have to do.
A vast number of underground networks existed throughout the pre-Roe era, which helped women find and reach safe abortion providers. Many women who could afford to do so were put in touch with doctors and clinics as far away as Mexico, Japan, or Europe. The largest underground group that existed was the Clergy Consultation Service. Led by Reverend Howard Moody, the network was comprised of approximately 1,400 ministers and rabbis across the country.
A small group of clergy, several in the village, decided that we were going to try to do something to help women in this time when it was illegal. And the way we felt the best way to do that was to help them find safe and secure abortions, because the situation at that time was just, it was horrible.
I knew about Moody's work with the Clergy Consultation for Problem Pregnancy, and they asked, would I consider helping them to form a clergy group to serve the Southwest.
My colleague Arlene Carmen, she was the secretary at the church at the time, but we were working together, and she would go out to West Virginia, Pennsylvania. She'd go and pretend to be pregnant. She'd go into the doctor's office and observe the cleanliness, observe the way people who were there. And when she was up on the table and her legs in the stirrup, she didn't tell him what she was about, that she represented a group of clergy who were referring women for abortions.
When I started first get involved at all, it was for personal friends or people who I knew who were having a problem, and they were lucky enough in a sense to have me around.
I went into it knowing that it's against the law, and I think this law needs to be changed, this service needs to be provided, and I'm going to do it understanding the risk that I'm taking, which may include going to prison.
It just was something you did to help, especially it's an evolutionary thing. You do it once or twice and you feel good about it and you feel better and you realize that you can do it, and it's a simple thing, and why the hell doesn't this become legal?
So I knew that every patient I saw had the potential to not only take my medical license, but put me in prison.
And you can go to jail, lose a license, not be able to make a living for a family with the knowledge you have. So those are real risks.
I think I lived on both denial and hope and perhaps an unrealistic sense of invulnerability. I decided that I have these magic hands and this incredible gift, and I'm going to be able to keep using it, and nothing bad is going to happen. But of course that wasn't true.
That as soon as you started doing it, someone else is going to tell someone else, because everyone wants to help each other.
I don't regret what I did. What I regret is that I didn't have the good judgment to go elsewhere to do it, rather than doing it in such a small town, in a town that so affected my family. And it wasn't fair to them, and I wish I could undo that.
I wanted to be an obstetrician gynecologist. I loved obstetrics. And it was something that could threaten my career.
A young woman who called me at home telling me that she was home for a Christmas vacation and she had an unwanted pregnancy, and could I help her? So I went through the process with her. Unfortunately, I didn't get her name, I didn't get her number, I had no way to get back to her. I should have, but I didn't. But I familiarized her with the process, told her what to do to get back to me. And she was a woman who, her call to me was the last straw. I later learned that she committed suicide by jumping out of a 17-story window. To this day, I feel responsible for her death.
When you're dealing with someone who's telling you about her aspirations and her troubles and her dreams and hopes, when I knew they were really hurting, I felt good about the fact that I could help somebody.
Over the years, I have often paused and thought about what I'm doing. And I've even prayed about it. Is this the right thing to do? Is this ethical? Will my descendants way down the road be ashamed of me? And I think that all of us who do abortions go through that same ethical, soul-searching process.
And I remember the day I was in the office, we were doing abortions, when the news came over the radio about the Supreme Court ruling. And I couldn't believe it. It was more than I would have asked for, more than I could believe that the Supreme Court would ever do. I just felt this, great sense of relief that, it's over. At last, it's over. We've won. Of course, little did I know what was to come, but that's another story.
My clinic alone serves 24 counties in northern Minnesota, 14 in Wisconsin, and 4 in Michigan. In 21 years, I've never had a local physician at this clinic. I've always had to either fly or have my physicians fly in.
Circuit provider, I guess, is defined as a person like me who travels to various clinics to provide the service. At one time I was providing services to 4 separate clinics in 4 different states. Now I'm down to just 2 clinics in 2 different states.
If I'm not on the front line, there is no front line. We've been picketed since 1975. My office has been blown up. We have had 4,000 people arrested outside my office in 1991. In 1993, I survived an assassination attempt. From August of 1994 until March of 1997, I was under daily U.S. Federal Marshal protection.
We who are providing service now are at the ages where we're retiring. The doctors right now are of the Roe v. Wade era. We saw and took care of women prior to Roe v. Wade, which the young doctors now have no clue how things were at that time.
It's important for us to be able to hear the stories about physicians who provided abortions pre-Roe v. Wade. It's important to have the storytelling and the histories repeated so that we can avoid any mistakes in the future. I think young people are out there. You know, we're on the streets. We are your interns. We are your escorts. We are medical students and residents. We are the protesters. We are the ones with the signs and slogans and songs at every pro-choice rallying effort. I think there is hope in young people. I think that we have vision and we have energy. So there is a passing of the torch, and we will gladly take it, and we will gladly rise to the occasion. We have the energy, we have the passion, we have the commitment. That is what we do. We've heard the stories, and we plan to invest our energies and invest our education into providing the standard of medical care for our women patients. If Roe v. Wade were to be overturned, say, tomorrow, it would take a tremendous collective uprising on the part of physicians and other healthcare practitioners, medical students and residents across the United States to demand change, to create change, to demand attention to this healthcare crisis and to the repercussions that would follow if abortion were to be illegal. So it is really a responsibility to be outspoken, to be advocates for our patients, for women in this country.
I think it is important for us to hear these stories. It is important for us to teach these young people what it was like before Roe versus Wade, so that we will never again go back to those days.